In this video, you're going to learn everything you need to get started with the automation tool N8N. We're going to build a simple automation together, and this automation uses the most important N8N features like triggers, logic, data processing, and AI. So the idea is that if you build along with me today while watching the video, then afterwards you will know everything you need to create your own N8N automations. And learning N8N is one of the best choices that you can make right now. It is growing extremely fast in popularity and is now even more popular than other automation tools like Zapier and Make. And the reasons for that are that number one, unlike other automation tools, N8N is extremely affordable and it even has a free version with unlimited automations. Number two, it is extremely capable and flexible at building automations. And number three, the most important one, it has extremely good AI features that you can add to your automations with just a few clicks. And if so far with the AI topic you felt like you've been a little more on the sideline and couldn't really use all of the potential of it, then N8N is 100% right for you. To get started, just go to the website n8n.io. Once you're on the website, there are two ways to use N8N. The first one is the cloud version, and this one is very easy to use. Essentially, you just create an account here on the website and you can get started with building automations immediately. Then there is a second version to use N8N, and that is you can self-host a community edition of N8N. So this is this one right here. And this community edition is what allows you to have unlimited automations completely for free or at a very low cost. However, this is a bit more technical to set up and to manage. The functionality between the two is almost exactly the same with only very few small differences. My recommendation to you as a beginner is to start with the N8N cloud version. The reason for that is you can get started very quickly. They have a 14-day trial and afterwards it's not very expensive. Because if you start immediately with self-hosting this community edition, especially in the beginning, this can be a bit overwhelming and too much information at once. Because self-hosting this and managing the self-hosting is a bit technical. So my recommendation is start with the cloud version, and then later, once you know all of the N8N fundamentals, then you can look into self-hosting this community edition. To get started with the cloud version, you just click on Get Started here at the top right, this orange button, and then you quickly have to fill out this form with all of your information. Once you've done that, you just click on Start Free 14-day trial here. And then it will ask you some questions. I'm quickly going to fill this out, and then you click on Submit. Then you could invite some collaborators that work on this automation project with you, but I'm going to skip this because I'm going to be the only one that works on this. And then you can click this button, Start Automating, and this is all you have to do to create your account. Okay, let's close this one up here. This, what you can see on the screen right now, this is the N8N dashboard. So here you have an overview of all of your workflows and all of your automation data essentially. To create a new automation in N8N, you just click this orange button here at the top, Create Workflow. And then this screen here opens up. This is the automation editor. This is where we can create and edit all of our automations. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click this small arrow here so that the sidebar minifies and we have a little more real estate on the screen. I'm quickly going to show you how to navigate this automation editor. So if you click on your mouse wheel, you can drag around the screen. Also, if you hold your command key or control on Windows, you can zoom in and zoom out by scrolling. And down here you have this button called Zoom to Fit. If you click on this or if you hit 1 on your keyboard, then wherever you are, the canvas will center and realign the automation workflow. So the automation we're going to build today is a lead automation. We are going to receive a new submission through a contact form, and then we want to save the data or we want to save the contact to a Google spreadsheet. And then in between, we're going to add some checks, including an AI check to see if it's a legitimate request or if it's a spam request. And the reason I chose this automation for the tutorial is because it includes all the important N8N features. This means that if you build along with me now and follow the tutorial, then afterwards you will have the fundamental knowledge of how N8N works, and then you can go on to build whatever custom automation you have in mind. And the Google Sheets file, I will put a link to that in the video description, but you can also quickly create this yourself. This is a super simple Google spreadsheet with literally just 2 columns, one called email and one called message, and you can create that in 10 seconds for yourself. And down here, the first sheet is called leads, and down here we have a second sheet or table called spam, and this one we're going to use later for the AI check. So quickly copy this into your own Google account from the link in the video description, or quickly create this yourself with these 2 columns. All right, so the first thing that every automation needs in N8N is a trigger. A trigger is what starts the automation, so something that happens somewhere that starts the automation. To add a trigger to your automation, you just click this big plus icon here, and then N8N gives you a list of all of the possible triggers that you can use. Also up here, you can see N8N's definition of a trigger. A trigger is a step that starts your workflow. The easiest trigger is probably this one called trigger manually. When you use this to start your workflow, all you have to do is you literally have to click manually on your automation and then it runs. Another really useful trigger is this trigger called on a schedule. And this basically allows you to run an automation on a set interval, like every day, every month, every week, every hour, something like that. A great example where I personally use that in my automations is this one right here, this accounting automation. So I have to do my accounting once every month, and this is why I've created this schedule trigger here so that it runs my automation once every month at the beginning of every month. And then you'll find a couple of other triggers down here, but probably the most important type of trigger is this trigger called on app event. And if I click on this, you can see a list of all the different applications and external services that N8N has an integration with. And essentially, you can use almost anything that happens in any of these, I think, over 800 integrations to trigger to start your automation. So for example, if I type in Gmail here and click on Gmail, there's a trigger called on message received. This means I can start my automation whenever I receive a new email in my Google Mail account. And the same with all of the other applications that I just showed you. The application that we're going to use today as a trigger for the automation is called N8N form. And this is a built-in kind of like a mini form that you can use as part of N8N. And we're going to use that as the trigger for the automation today because this is integrated in N8N, so you don't have to create an extra account for it. And then everybody can follow the tutorial. So I click on this N8N form, and then I select the trigger on new N8N form event, and this adds the trigger to the page. The first thing that we have to do is we have to quickly create this form. This has not that much to do with the automation yet. We just have to create the form so we can use it as a trigger for the workflow. I'm going to call this a project inquiry form for a hypothetical web agency. And for the form elements, I'm just going to click this button here twice, add form element. And the first input field I call email. And the second one I call message. And that's all we have to do here. Let's click on back to canvas to close this. And now I want to test my automation for the first time. To test an automation in N8N, all we have to do is we have to click on this button down here called execute workflow. And this will open up our form. Now I can enter an email. I'm just going to enter some dummy data here. And then I submit the form. Okay, let's go back to N8N. And we can see it says workflow executed successfully. And I also know that this workflow executed successfully because our trigger here, our trigger step, has this green check mark. If I double click on the trigger here, we can see that it even generated some output data in the form of a data item. And this data item includes an email, a message, and then some additional automatically generated metadata about the form. And now we can use this output data, we can use this output item in the next steps of our automation. Okay, so let's recap. Someone submits the form. This activates our trigger. Then the trigger generates some output data in the form of an item and then starts the automation. The problem is right now our automation does absolutely nothing. And to make an automation do something in N8N, what we can do is we can click this plus icon here at the top right. And then we can add an action to our automation. As you can see here, there are all types of different categories of action. For example, here's an AI category with all different types of AI actions. We're actually going to use some of that a little later. Or for example, down here, you have a category called data transformation where you can kind of modify your data. Or down here, we have some flow actions, all different types of things that you can do in N8N. And then obviously you also have this category action in an app. If I click on this, we again get a list of all the hundreds of integrations that N8N has, and you can perform actions inside of all these different external apps and services. We are going to add multiple actions to the automation today, but the first action we're going to add is an action called Google Sheets. Because remember, we want to save the data from the form submission to our Google spreadsheet that I showed you in the beginning, this one right here. To add this to the page, I click on it, and then we get a list of all the different things that we can do inside of this Google spreadsheet. In this case, I'm going to choose append row in sheet, because that's what we want to do. We want to add a new row to the spreadsheet. Once I click on it, it gets added to the page. We are going to talk about this interface right here in a few moments, but before that, I'm going to close it by clicking back to Canvas here at the top left, or you can also hit your escape key on the keyboard. Then, if it's not connected yet to the trigger, I'm going to drag this here and then click on this plus and drag a connection to the Google Sheets step. And in fact, in N8N, we also call these steps of the automation nodes. So for example, this is our trigger node, and this would be our Google Sheets node. To open the node and to edit it, you just double click, and then this interface here shows up. This is the node editor. And this is where we can configure the behavior of this automation step. In N8N, every node, every automation step works exactly the same. You can see we have 3 sections here. The first section is the input, so the data that we receive from the previous automation step. In our case, that is the data from the form submission trigger. Then here in the middle, we have some type of action that the node performs. This is obviously specific to the type of node that you add. So right now this is a Google Sheets node, so the action will have something to do with Google Sheets. And then here on the right, this is the output data. So after the node performs some action, it generates some output data, and then it passes on the output data to the next node in the automation. And then the next node receives that data as another input. Then it takes that input to perform another action, generates some new output data, passes it on to the next node, and so on and so forth. So that is the general idea. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to increase this middle section here a little bit. And up here, I'm going to drag this into the center. So you can drag this around depending on which side you need more space. Right now, I'm just going to put it into the center. Let's start to configure this node. Let's look at the first section here, the input section. There's not much that we can configure here. Because this data here is predetermined. It just depends on whatever we receive from the previous node. The only kind of thing that you can configure is how the data should be displayed to you. Either schema, this is this one. Usually I use this schema view because it's the easiest to look at the data. But you can also display the data in the form of a table or in JSON. This is a more technical data format. But all of these display the exact same data. So you change nothing about the data here. You just change how the data is being displayed. Okay, let's keep it at schema for now. And then we can move on to configuring the action of this node. The first thing that we have to do here, and this is very common in N8N, we have to select a credential. So it says credential to connect with. Because if we perform some type of action in an external service, so in this case, in my Google Sheets account, I have to give N8N access. I have to give it the right so that it is allowed to modify and edit my Google Sheet. Otherwise, it cannot perform the action within it. To connect my N8N account to my Google Sheets account, I just click on Select Credential. And if I have not created one yet, then I just click on this Create New Credential button here. And then I get to this screen. In the cloud version of N8N, you have this big button here, Sign in with Google, and we can use that to connect our Google Sheets account. If you have started against my recommendation with the self-hosted version, then the setup here is a little more complicated, not impossible, but then you just have to quickly Google how to connect Google Sheets with N8N. There are tons of good tutorials on this, and then after 5 minutes you'll be at the same step. But here in the cloud version, I can just comfortably click on Sign in with Google. Then my Google account opens up. I click on it. I click on continue, and now it says connection successful. And now I get the message my account has been connected. I'm going to close this connection window. And now you can see it has chosen this Google Sheets account credential. Perfect. So now we have a proper connection. The next line here is the resource. It says sheet within document. This is just the default, and we're going to leave it at that. The operation append row, I'm also not going to change it because this is what we chose when we added this node to the automation. Next, the document. So this is the first line where we make some changes. So now I have to select the Google spreadsheet where I want to save the data to. Because we gave N8N access to our Google Sheets account, it can now look at the spreadsheets inside of it and can display all of them here in a list, and you can just select the Google Sheets file that you want to edit. In my case, this is this website agency leads sheet. And then we have to choose the sheet itself, because in every Google spreadsheet, there are these subsheets. So in my case, this leads subsheet and this spam subsheet that I've created. And for now, we only want to save the data to the leads sheet. Once I make the selection, N8N looks at this Google spreadsheet, and you can see it has determined this Google spreadsheet has two columns, one called email and one called message. And we can now use these fields to enter or save data to this spreadsheet. So what I could do here is, by default, I could just type in some random email here. Super random, whatever at example.com. And then I could just type in a message called hello. And now we can test this. So I'm going to click on execute step here at the top to only execute the current automation node. It says executing node. And now it says node executed successfully. And then here it gives us as output data the new row that has been added to the Google Sheet. I'm quickly going to switch this to schema so that we use the schema display version on both sides. If we take a look at this Google Sheet, we can see our email, the random email with the message hello, has also been successfully added. The problem with that is, obviously, I do not want to send this exact email, whatever at example.com, and the message hello every time I receive a form submission. This would completely defeat the purpose. Obviously, I want to send the email and the message that I receive from the form submission trigger. To connect data from previous nodes to a field in N8N, what you can do is, I'm going to quickly delete these fields. What you can do is you can click on a field and then switch the mode of the field from fixed to expression. And this then allows you to drag pieces of data, for example, this message data from the previous node, this email data from the previous node, into the field right here. And we can do the same with the message. If I switch from fixed to expression, I can now drag this message data from the previous node into this field. And what this means now, this double curly braces $JSON.email or double curly braces $JSON.message, all this means is we're telling N8N, we're giving N8N the instruction to look at the previous node's data that we receive as input, and then take whatever email and whatever message we got from it and then use it as the value of these fields, and then send the data to Google Sheets. Okay, let's quickly test this out. I'm going to click on back to canvas, or again, you can also use your escape key on your keyboard. And then I get to the automation overview again. To test the workflow, remember, we can just click on execute workflow. Then our form opens up again. I'm going to enter an email and a message, hello, and submit the form. Go back to the automation. Right now we can see the trigger has activated and it says workflow executed successfully. Perfect. Let's have a look if this actually worked. in my Google Sheets, you can see we have a new row called mail@example.com with this hello message that I just submitted with the form. The big problem with this automation at the moment is that, for example, if someone decides to enter an email here and does not enter a message and submits the form, then what happens is the automation executes, and it executes successfully. And then if we have a look, it goes ahead and stores this email with an empty message inside of our Google Sheet. Obviously, we do not want that. To prevent that, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a new node to this automation, and the node is a filter node. And the filter node, what this filter node does is it looks at the data, and we can then decide a condition. In our case, the message is not allowed to be empty, and the condition then decides if the next step should be executed or not. I'm going to click on plus here and then search the filter and then add the filter to the page. Let's close this for a moment. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this connection here between the first two nodes, add the filter in between, then connect the trigger to the filter and the filter to the Google Sheets action. I double click the filter to open it up. As I told you already with the Google Sheets node, every N8N node works exactly the same. We have an input from the previous node. We have some type of action that the node performs, in this case a filter action, and then we have some type of output that the node generates after the action. So let's start to configure this. The way the filter works is, as you can see here, we have the option to define a condition. And this condition basically decides when an item or some data is valid and when it is not valid. And if it is valid, it will be passed on to the next automation step. And if it's not valid, it will not be passed on as output to the next automation step, and the automation does not continue. Right here with this condition, you can set up lots of different things. If I click on this drop down here, you can see we have lots of different options. We have some date and time conditions. We have some Boolean conditions, some number operations like is greater than or equal to, things like that. And up here, we also have the text operation called string. And here we have multiple operations or checks. And I'm going to choose the one called is not empty, because that's what I want to check. I want to check our input data if it's not empty. And in fact, what I want to check exactly is the message that we receive from the input data. And remember, to connect some data from the previous automation step, what you can do is you can click on a field, switch the mode to expression, and then drag the piece of data into this field. And now the value of this expression here will be whatever we receive from the previous automation step. And what you can also do here, you can make the condition much more complicated. You can chain conditions with and or, but in our case, this is not necessary. So I'm going to delete this again and just stick with this very simple one. Okay, let's go back to the automation overview. And then I test the workflow, execute workflow, and let's try it out. Let's see if our filter works as expected. So I add, maybe this time test@example.com instead of mail@example.com. And I leave the message empty and click on submit. Let's go back. The automation executed successfully. However, we can see this time only the first two nodes executed. Because only the first two nodes have this green check mark, the Google Sheets node does not have the green check mark. And if we open the filter node with a double click, we can see the reason for that. The filter node executed successfully and it generated some output. However, it decided that this input data, this input item, is not valid data because the message is empty, but we want a not empty message. And that is why it has decided to discard this data item and not pass it on to the next step of our automation. And that is why the next step of our automation, this Google Sheets node, did not run. And this highlights the most important part about N8N and how it works. The fuel of every N8N automation, the lifeblood of every N8N automation, are these data items that get passed around from the start to the end of the automation in the form as input and in the form of output. And if you think of these data items as fuel, then you can quickly understand why when a node does not pass on some output data in the form of these data items to the next automation step, then the automation does not continue. An automation step or a node in N8N can only execute if it receives one of these data items from the previous node. If it does not receive a data item, like in this case, because the filter decided it's not going to pass any data on to the Google Sheets node, then it's not going to execute. This is really important. And if you keep in mind this analogy with the fuel, then you can easily remember this. If a car does not have fuel anymore, the car cannot drive. And the same with the automation. If some part of the automation does not receive fuel, then it cannot continue to execute. Let's try it out with the opposite. So I'm going to execute this workflow again, but this time I'm going to enter a message, test@example.com, some dummy data as the message, and I submit the form. Let's go back to the automation. You can see it executes. Workflow executed successfully. And this time you can see all 3 nodes have the green check mark and executed. Because this time the filter looked at the input item and saw, okay, this message fulfills the condition. It is not empty, so it meets all of the requirements. And this is why I can pass it on as output data in the form of a data item to the next node. And then the next node, the Google Sheets node, receives some data, receives some fuel, and will then execute. And this is the core principle behind how N8N works. Okay, let's quickly save this. I click Save up here, or Control S, Command S on your keyboard to store the progress. And now it's going to get really interesting, because we are now going to add some AI functionality to this automation. Before we get to the AI functionality, I want to give you a warning and an encouragement at the same time. See, if you learn N8N and if you stick to learning N8N, then eventually in the next couple of days or in the next couple of weeks, what is going to happen is you're going to run into a little bit of frustration. And the reason for that is because N8N is very powerful. So this is actually a good reason. N8N is very powerful. However, this comes with the slight disadvantage that it's a little harder to learn than other automation tools. It's not impossible, it's not rocket science, but it's a little harder because there's just so much more that you can do. But I want to encourage you to, when that frustration happens, to not give up and do not switch back to some other automation tool. Stick with N8N, it is definitely worth it. And in my experience, the best way to overcome this initial frustration is to learn the fundamentals of how N8N works behind the scenes, so the technical aspects of N8N. For example, if we look at this filter node, how these data items here work behind the scenes. What does this JSON here mean? How does it work? What are these expressions? Why is there this double curly braces? Why does it say JSON or $JSON? What does it mean? I mean, there's a lot more that you can do with this right here. I'm not going to go into too much detail today, but there's tons of things that you can do here. And if you're interested in learning about these technical aspects of N8N, these technical fundamentals, then feel free to check out my course that I've created called Technical N8N Simplified. I will put a link to that in the video description, and I'll also put the link on that to the screen, and you can go to that link and have a look at the course. I think it's going to save you a lot of time and help you quickly through that initial stage of frustration. Okay, let's get to the fun part. We are now going to add some AI functionality to our automation. So what I want to do is I want to do a spam check, because right now the problem is the message that we can receive from our form is anything. So we could receive a completely rubbish or spam message and the automation would still go ahead and say, okay, the message is not empty, that's good. And then it would go ahead and save it in this Google Sheets file. And I do not want that. What I want to do is I want to add an AI node in here, and we're going to do that in a few moments. And then, depending on whether or not the AI classifies the form submission as spam, I want to either save the form submission in this leads table here, if it's a legitimate request, or in this spam table or this spam subsheet, if it's a spam request. To do that, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this connection here. And then I will duplicate this here, because we will now need 2 actions. One that saves the legitimate requests and one that saves the spam requests. And then I will add a AI block from the AI category called Open AI, because we want to use ChatGPT to perform the spam check. So OpenAI, and again, there are tons of different actions that you can perform here. I'm going to choose the text action called message a model, because that's what we want to do. We want to message an AI model. Let's close this for a moment and connect this properly. N8N connected it to this node because it was the last one that I had selected. Let's delete this connection and connect this here. Then move this a little to the right. One more thing that I would like to do now before we dive deep into the AI functionality is I want to organize this workflow a little better. Because right now, to me, it's not really clear what's going on. Because, for example, this filter node is called filter. Filter what? Or this one is called message a model, whatever that means. This one is called append row in sheet 1. This one is called append row in sheet. If I look at this from the outside, I don't really know what's going on. To rename a node in N8N, what you can do is you can select it with a single click and then hit your spacebar on your keyboard. So let's think about this filter. What it does is it removes submissions with an empty message. So that's literally what I'm going to call it. Remove submissions with empty message. And now it's much more clear what's going on here because it has a descriptive name. Same with this one here. I select it, hit the space bar on the keyboard, and I'm going to call this AI spam check. Then this one here, I'm going to call this save to spam sheet. We're going to configure this a little later. And this one I'm going to call save to leads sheet. And now, if I look at this, it's much more clear what's going on. While we're at it, we can also rename the entire workflow. So up here, the workflow or the automation is called My Workflow. Extremely bad name. So instead, I'm going to call this, let's call it lead form to Google Sheets. And now later, when I look at it, it will be much more clear what this automation does. Now finally, I double click on this AI spam check and we can start to configure it. And again, I tell you, every node in N8N works exactly the same. We receive some type of input, then in the middle we perform some type of action, in this case an AI action, and on the right we have some type of output that is then passed on to the next node. Here we also have to now connect our OpenAI account so that we authorize N8N to use our own OpenAI or ChatGPT account to perform these AI checks. The cool thing is N8N has this option up here called Get 100 free OpenAI API credits. And I can click on Claim Credits, and then it automatically creates a credential for me. So with these free credits, I don't even have to create an account on OpenAI or a connection myself to get started. However, obviously, eventually you're going to run out of these free credits, or maybe you have already run out, or maybe you're on the self-hosted version of N8N. Then you have to set up a proper OpenAI connection. And I'm quickly going to show you how to do it. You would just click on this button here, then click on Create New Credential, and then you can see it asks you for an API key. Where do you get that API key from? The answer is very simple. You go to the website platform.openai.com. There you sign up with your OpenAI or ChatGPT account, or you create one if you don't have one yet. Then you go to the settings up here at the top, go to billing, add your credit card, because obviously this AI usage is not for free, but it's also not very expensive. So it will cost you like half a cent for every message that you send to the AI, something like that. And then once you've done that, if you're worried about spending too much accidentally, you can also set up a limit here. So for example, my monthly budget, you can see, is limited at $50. Once you've done that, you go to API keys and then you create a new secret key, and this will give you your API key. I've already done that. Once you have done that, you copy it, you come back here and paste it in and then click on save. And then you will have your own API connection that you can use continuously in your N8N account. But for this tutorial, you don't have to do it. You can just stick with the free OpenAI credits credential here. The resource, we are going to leave that as text. The operation, message a model. I don't want to change that. Then I can choose a model. In this case, I'm going to choose the latest mini model that they have. In my case, that's GPT 4.1 mini. You choose whatever is your latest mini model. And then I can fill out the prompts. The first prompt that I want to add is a system prompt. So a system prompt is kind of like an instruction that you give the AI how it should behave. And then later, if we click on add message, later we are going to then add a second prompt, and this second prompt will then include the data of the form submission. Okay, I just pasted the prompt here that I've prepared. You can copy that. By the way, all of the lesson materials will be available in the video description, so you can copy that. And I'm quickly going to go through this. So the prompt says you are a spam filter. You will receive submissions from our form. Everything which is not a request or question related to our business should be categorized as spam. Additionally, if dummy emails like mail@example.org are used, so basically what I've been doing until now, this should also be categorized as spam. Your task, this is really important now, your task is to respond with yes if it is spam and with no if it is legitimate and not spam. Do not explain yourself. Do not add any additional text or output. Only respond with a single word yes if the submission is spam and no if it's not spam and legitimate. So we're giving it some type of instructions for the output format. And then we can go to the prompt itself. And here I'm going to write, here is the form submission, email, message, And now I want to pull in the data that we receive from the form submission. And remember, whenever you want to dynamically pull in data from the previous automation steps, then what you have to do is you have to switch this from fixed to expression, and then you can pull in data. For some reason, this is now in JSON mode here, the input data. I'm going to switch this back to schema. And then where it says on form submission, so I want to get it directly from the trigger itself, not from the filter, I'm going to pull in this email, and then I'm going to pull in the message. One thing that you might notice here is this format here of the reference of this expression is a little different than previously. So if we go to, for example, our filter here, the way we referenced the data from the previous node was with this $JSON.message, because this is what popped up once we pulled in this piece of data into this field. And this $JSON.message, what this means is take the input that we get from the last step, so from the previous node that comes before this node, and then look and find the message data point and add it as the value of this field. However, what we're doing here now, we're not referencing data from the previous step, but we're referencing data from the second to previous or second to last step. So we're referencing data from this trigger node, which is not the one before this AI spam check. And whenever we do that, then the syntax, how we reference the data, changes a little bit. And it uses this $, then the name of the node where we are referencing the data from, .item.json, and then the name of the piece of data. So that's kind of a small difference of how we can reference data from steps that are not directly before the current step, but some step in the distance, like the second to last step, the third to last step. And in case there's a small, tiny little bug in N8N, sometimes you don't see the data here. And in most cases, you can fix that if you quickly switch to the JSON view, then select the data here from this previous node that is not the last node, and then go back to the schema view, and then you will have access to the data from the previous nodes that are not the last node. Okay, let's try this out. I'm going to go back to Canvas, click on Escape, and then I'm going to execute the workflow. And you can run these test executions of your automations, even if there are some abandoned nodes that are not yet connected to the automation. That does not matter. You can still test the automation. So I click on execute, then enter some dummy data. So this should be classified as spam if everything works correctly. Submit the form, go to our automation workflow executed successfully. And if we now have a look at this AI spam check, you can see it generated some output in the form of a data item. The important one is this called message. And then inside of that, the content. And you can see the content is yes. So that's what the AI responded with. It looked at the form submission according to our prompt and said, yes, this is spam. And if I try this out again, this time with some proper message, hello, Where can I book your services? Submit the form. The workflow executes successfully again. And if we now have a look at the output, we get a response from the AI as no. The AI said, no, this is not spam. And it was correct. Now, we somehow have to set up some functionality in this workflow that then, after the AI has classified the form submission that it receives from the trigger and decides to save it into the spam sheet and to save it into the lead sheet. So what I could do in a very naive way is I could obviously go ahead and connect this AI spam check to both of these actions. Oh, and by the way, I totally forgot that. We have to, in this action here, change the sheet from leads to spam. So that when this executes, it is not saved in the leads table, but instead in the spam table. Okay, so obviously we could just connect this AI spam check to both of these nodes and then hope and pray that everything works. But this is not going to work at all. Because in this case, the AI spam check would just do absolutely nothing. It would just send the data to both of these branches and then both of them would execute. And that's not really what we want. Instead, we have to set up some type of logic that decides when we want to send the data to this spam step and when we want to send the data to this leads step. And to do that, we can add another type of action to our automation in the flow category. So in the flow category, we have lots of different logic building blocks for our automation, one of which is called if. And I'm going to add that to the workflow. Let's close this for a moment and remove these two connections and connect the Google Sheets node to this if node. And then let's have a closer look at what this does. So this if node receives some data from the previous nodes. And then based on a condition that we define, if the condition is true, it will send the data on the true branch. If the condition is false, for the input that it receives, it will send the data on the false branch. So our condition will be the spam check, the content or the response that we receive from the AI, is it equal to yes? And this means it is spam. That is our condition. So if the message is spam, send the data on the true branch, and then we connect the true branch to the save to spam sheet node. If it is not spam, so if this condition is not fulfilled because the response is not yes but no, then send the data on the false branch and execute the save to lead sheet. Let's also rename this if node. I'm going to not call this if, this is a bad name, but instead I'm going to call this is spam ? And if that is true, we save to the spam sheet. If that is false, we save to the lead sheet. Okay, let's try this out again. Execute workflow. Let's start with spam, mail@example.com. Hello, buy my book and products. Submit the form. Let's see. The automation executes. The AI correctly classified it as spam. The if node executed successfully, but for some reason we now got an error in our spam sheet. Oh, that is because we didn't set it up yet. Okay. Let's quickly set this up as well. So the values that we have to send, we want to take the values again from this form submission trigger. So from a step way back in our automation. So this means if we add this here, you can see we get this alternative syntax that references the name of a node to get the previous data from it. And again, if you want to learn how these expressions and how this syntax here works behind the scenes and what the kind of technical fundamentals of that are, feel free to check out my technical N8N course. I go into a lot of detail about that in this course. Okay, now this is properly set up. Let's also check this one. Okay, here we can see, okay, this is a really good example of that because remember in the beginning, this step was directly connected to the trigger. So this means when we added this expression here that references the data, it added this $JSON.email. So this means it referenced the data that it received from the previous step that is right in front of it. However, now the trigger with the data that we need is no longer directly in front of this Google Sheets step, which is why this is no longer going to work. So here as well, we have to reference the data from the trigger node. The problem is right now, it says no fields, node executed, but no items were sent on this branch. And the reason for that is because obviously the last test submission that we did was spam and thus executed on this branch, but not on this one. And so we don't have access to the data yet. So we have to execute this again. I'm going to execute the workflow, and this time again with a legitimate request. Where can I learn more about your services? Submit the form. This triggers the automation. The AI classified it as not spam, and the if block then decided to send data on this false branch and sent it to this leads table in the Google Sheets. We now should have access to the data from the trigger node. We don't. That is the small N8N bug that I mentioned in the beginning, and we can fix that by going to JSON, selecting the form submission, going back to schema, and then we have access to the data from all the previous steps. And I'm going to pull this in here. It creates our special syntax to reference a specific node. And then if we close this and execute this again with a proper message, submit the form, it is classified as non-spam and saves it to the lead table. Hello, where can I book your consulting? Perfect. Okay, now stick with me for a few more moments. There's one more extremely important thing that we have to do now. But before that, I quickly want to remind you of this fundamental principle again of how N8N works. Remember, these items, these data items that are passed around as input and output, they are the fuel, they are the lifeblood of every automation. And we can see that really well with this if block here. The reason this leads sheet node executed and this one did not execute is because the if block decided only to send data on this false branch. And thus only this node here received fuel and could execute. And this node up here in this case did not receive any data, did not receive any fuel, and thus it did not execute. That is so important to keep in mind, and if you keep that in mind, then you will have a much easier time to work with N8N. The most important thing that we have to do now is we have to publish this automation, because right now it is only in test mode, but it's not really running in production. To fix that, let's first quickly save our progress. I switch this toggle from inactive to active, confirm this modal, and now our automation is live. And you have to do that with every automation after you complete building it. In this case, we also have to share the URL with someone because this is a form. We need to somehow send people the link to the form. And in that case, we would send the production URL, not the test URL. And you could now use this URL to embed this on your website or to send it to other people so that they can fill out the form. Thank you so much for tuning in to this video. If you have any questions, leave them as a comment to this video. If you want to learn more about N8N, then check out the course that I mentioned, and obviously also subscribe to this YouTube channel because I'm going to publish a lot more videos like this in the future. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Mike. Have a great day. Bye.